Good afternoon. Welcome, everyone. That was a sudden flood of 20 plus people with more coming. It's like the doors to this gig have been thrown open and there's been a rush to the mosh pit. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us. Happy Monday. That's the first of many very corny musical references we will be making throughout today, because the theme of today's session is notes for change that works. Over the next hour, we will be exploring what is the evidence base for change that works. What do we mean when we talk about change that works? What seems to work, what doesn't, and what might that tell us about how we might approach change in the future? What can we learn from the past about change that works? Really pleased to have such a great group of people. I hope you'll all take something from it, and we'll be hearing from all of you in due course. Of course, if you have arrived under the assumption that this is some kind of BBC Six music podcast, sadly not. It is about the management of change. You're welcome to stay, of course, but I just wanted to do some clear contracting. Okay, we are going to be recording. We'll make this available to you and friends and family after the event, and we'll also be doing some polling throughout today. So there might be some of those results that you might want to screen grab, and if not, again, we can share the results of those as well. By way of introduction, I'm Shane. I'm part of the team here at Kaleidoscope Health and Care. I'll let my fellow speakers, Katie and Thea, introduce themselves as we come to them. But my job today is to just steer us through the conversation and make sure that you get what you need. Okay. So let us move forward. Tech allows me to do so. Here we go. Okay, so just some housekeeping rules. You can read all of that. For those of you so minded, social media, hashtag change that works. Please do Blue Sky and LinkedIn. Personally, I'd rather you didn't tweet, but again, there's no judgment. But we are there. You can reach out to the amazing Pete, who's in the background today. If you've got any tech issues, just drop Pete an email there at support@kaleidoscopehealth.org.uk. He's a living legend, and will do everything he can to sort you out. So again, if you need to pop away, address any distractions off screen. Thea, Katie, and I may well be interrupted by dogs, not the same dogs, but separately. If so, we will do some introductions. Again, if you've got any problem accessing the chat or seeing the slides, hop out, hop on. You'll turn it on, turn it off again. And if still struggling, do drop Pete a line. But if all else fails, we are recording. We are, in the spirit of change, we are using a different Microsoft Teams capability today, which is a sort of a town hall function. So some of you may be used to using the chat button, but actually what we're using today is a Q&A button. It sort of works broadly the same. You should see at the top of your screen. All you need to do is open it up. You can comment by asking a new question, or you can comment and respond to a question that is already there. And if you want to keep up to date with the most recent stuff that's coming in, just click on new posts. So okay, just who we are as the host today. So for those of you who don't know, we are a small but we think mighty not-for-profit social enterprise. We came into the world to contribute to a future that is kind, connected and joyful, particularly in health and care. And we do that by providing a range of consultancy services to bring people together and to do just that. This is what we do. We are a small consultancy that provides these services. Today, we're particularly interested in the ideas of organizational development, service change, and strategy. That will become obvious as we go through. So today we've got 3 objectives: build some understanding, share some practical learning, and support new connections. And the agenda is excitingly arranged to do just that. We will end with some form of rapture. TBC, Katie and Thea have promised us it will be a rapturous session. So can make our own determination on that at the end. But that is what we're going to be doing. Okay, so just to get us activated, we are going to invite you to join us in Menti. So pop on to menti.com. For those of you who don't know, this is just a way for us to interact and collect some data. You can go straight to menti.com and enter the code 6844 2174 or scan the QR code. And the amazing Pete is taking over in the background, is going to guide us through Menti. So we're just going to quickly ask a few questions that will provide a bit of stimulus to all of you, and particularly Thea and Katie, as we get into this. So lots of hearts popping up. Thank you very much for letting us know you're there. Okay, Pete, let's find out where people are joining us from. So drop a pin. Apologies to anyone who's joining us from a more exotic location than outside the UK or sort of northern France, sort of, you know, Belgium. Just stick your dot in the ocean wherever you feel most appropriate. Thea, Katie, where are you joining us from while these come in?
Manchester.
My second home, well, actually, so third home after Belfast. Lovely. Katie?
I'm in London, in Greenwich, but slightly jealous of Thea being in Manchester because that's where my family are.
Yeah, Katie is from Preston. I think our northern sensibilities have sort of drawn us to the misery of change. We can talk about that as a sort of cultural phenomenon. But this is sort of interesting. So we've got a really nice mix of people across England. I'll fly the flag for Northern Ireland, and if anybody is there from Wales or Scotland but feels too embarrassed to say, it's perfectly okay to pop a flag on there. We're here for you. Okay, so that's lovely. Nice range station, and welcome from Cornwall, whoever that is. I hope you're on holiday. I actually hope you're not on holiday because you're joining us, but if you're on holiday joining us, thank you. Okay, so okay, what's your song? So what is your song about change? We need to add our playlist, and we will create this playlist and we will share it to you. Thea, I know this has been causing you some existential dread. What is your song?
Well, it was causing me anxiety because I kept looking at songs about change and realized that really I didn't want to choose a song about change. And because I think change is always about people. And so once I'd worked out that I didn't want to choose a song about change, I was doing better. And I chose instead We Can Work It Out by the Beatles. Because I think my approach to change is, on the whole, is life is very short and there's no time for fussing or fighting, my friend. So I chose that.
Love it. And I think just the opening line is try to see it my way, which of course is, you know, as any good chief exec, is a good opening line.
It's on to say that's not the way to do it.
It does. Thank you for that build.
Not the way to do it.
Humble leadership. You are an exemplar. Oh, lovely. Katie, what's your song? There's an amazing collective. Philip Glass has got to mention. This is a very cerebral group. Amazing.
Yeah, I'm looking at these all come through and very inspired. I chose Count on Me, Bruno Mars. I had very similar crisis to Thea. I couldn't figure out change. All of the songs on change that I was coming across felt like they were to do with individuals or big world change. And I was just like, surely it's about collaboration and coming together and people, and actually change exists in teams and in relationships. And so I felt like that was a good one to land on.
Lovely. I am loving these songs. So we've got some emotional states, courage, patience. There's optimism. Things can only get better. I can change. Um, uh, don't stop me now. There's a little bit of sort of cycling, sort of the sense of sort of change being a little bit familiar. So let's go round again. Break on through and take that. Take a walk on the wild side. I think that's probably, I hadn't thought of that. That's probably for anybody who has been following the recent sort of spate of changes in the NHS. That probably feels very opposite. It does feel a bit wild at the minute. I'm still standing. Fantastic. I think we all resonate with that, and hopefully you're all still standing at the end of this. Brilliant. We will pull those into a playlist and we will pop them around, and maybe that will keep us all going in the months ahead. Okay, Pete, can we pop on to the next questions where things get a little bit more serious? So, what we're trying to do is just get a sense for our individual and collective experiences of change, and how change works or doesn't work, and how we think about and how we approach an evidence-based way of working with and through change. So we've put up a sort of set of statements there. We're just asking you, without judgment, to just tell us where you sit, thinking about where you mostly work on a continuum around these statements. Yeah, any of those? I'm not going to ask you about about how you would talk about these things at the Nuffield, but when you look at these, what's the one that sort of jumps out at you that you sort of think, if I could wish for anything for an organization going through change, which of those feels most important to be able to strongly agree with?
Probably the last one.
Tell
In
us a little
terms
bit
of
more
what
about
I'd
that.
want people to be able to do. I think where most people are, it's where most people already say they are, feeling trapped in a cycle of responding reactively to change.
Very interesting. Katie, what are you seeing coming up here?
Yeah, I guess not necessarily surprised to see that second one, feeling trapped in a cycle of responding reactively. And I think that is the biggest tension, right, between we all want to be responsive rather than reactive, but often the world around us requires us to react. And how do we do that diligently and kindly and compassionately and in a considered way? So that doesn't necessarily surprise me. I see that with a lot of teams that I work with. I think I'm with Thea that reflecting on and learning from change previously, I think is huge. We often stop and reflect. We don't often stop and reflect and then apply the learning.
Yeah, I would commend Professor Naomi Fulop's work on learning lessons from change to anyone who hasn't come across it. She shows like a historian of change that has or hasn't worked. We had the pleasure of having her with us last year, and that was very insightful. I'm really struck by the starting with the theory of change or have an agreed model is really sort of interesting, because today we're going to speak about where change works, what are the characteristics of change, how do we approach this from a basis of evidence, and do it in a way that's deliberate. So hopefully we can maybe move those two pinks along to the right. And then again, this sort of sense of feeling trapped. I think hopefully today we can at least find some comfort in each other. We can normalize that. And I think an interesting thing to reflect on is that sometimes we equate all reactive change as being negative, and that's not always the case. So there is something about how we're framing the idea of reactive change, and is there an invitation to a different kind of response to some of that? Okay, lovely. Pete, one more, please, Maestro. Okay, so we're going to hand over in a moment to Katie and Thea, but just to help them, what would you most like to hear about today? So thinking about where you plotted yourself on those sliders, what would be most helpful to hear about? Thea, is there something particularly that you're sitting with at the minute that you're you're keen to learn a little bit more about, or you're wrestling with in your own work?
Always just open to listen to what people are talking about, where they are. The conversation is always the most interesting part of any of these sessions, I think, really. Just listening to others.
Okay. So some comments or requests are starting to come in. So how do we support colleagues? And I think support and look after ourselves. Change can be a very, very challenging endeavor for anyone, particularly in a leadership role, as well as those we are leading. So there's something about how do we look after ourselves and others. Frameworks you might use. What do we mean by producing a meaningful theory of change? We actually did a webinar on theory of change not that long ago, and we can share a link on that. Some colleagues ran that. It was fantastic. How do we influence people who are stuck in their ways, or perhaps take maybe a curious lens on maybe why they're stuck, and maybe some of that's legitimate, and how do we maybe sit with resistance in a way that's creative? And Thea, I know that's something that you're gonna touch on. How do we make the case for change to cut through in action? How do we make people care about a change that perhaps isn't as important to them as it is to you? How do we make change feel authentic? Burnout, key enablers in a busy and tired organization. Yeah, I think a lot of these will resonate. Okay, so full disclaimer, I don't think we're going to be able to answer all of these. But what I invite you is, while Thea and Katie are scanning, is if you have come across interesting resources or you've got ideas that you think would be useful to share in response to some of these, please pop them into the Q&A function, and we'll collate and share all of those back. So just inviting you to be a community of interest and practice for each other, looking at what has come up. Okay, Pete, if we can toggle back to the slides, please, that would be amazing. And thank you for all your support, Pete. We appreciate you. Okay, so we're going to transition to Katie and Thea in a second. Katie's going to kick off with a short 5-minute sort of preamble about what our view and position on change that works is, and then we're going to pass to Thea. And one of the things that I feel very strongly about, I teach at UCL and teach a lot of frameworks and models, and actually what the research shows is that the models are only as good as the people implementing them. It really is the singer, not the song, that makes the music move along, that makes change happen. And no doubt we'll talk about that. So delighted to have two amazing singers who are going to help move us along. And the first of those is my wonderful colleague Katie Goulding. So Katie, how does it really work?
Well, thank you, Shane. I have 5 minutes to cover off, I guess, a little bit of a sense as to how we think about change and how we talk with organisations right across the country about bringing change into practice. So first of all, apologies, there'll be things that I just won't have time to go into lots of detail on, but I would be absolutely up for longer conversations. So if there's anything that kind of go, that's really interesting, ping me an email. I would absolutely love to kind of catch up and have coffee or anything like that. I work alongside Shane at Kaleidoscope as part of the team. The two of us together are trusted to be involved in our organisational development work. interesting decision to trust the two of us together. I was a little bit worried that Shane was going to ask Thea and I to actually sing, but you are all off the hook that is not what this is about. So in terms of how change really works, first of all, if you want to just move on one more slide, Shane, just a little bit of a, I guess, touch point in terms of how, back one more, how we know this works. We work with lots of organisations right across a range of different sectors. Some of them are on the screen there. You may be sat there from one of these organisations, in which case, thank you for joining us. It would be lovely to reconnect. Let us know that you're here. We would love to check in and see how you are doing. But the next few slides that I will walk through really bring together things that we have learned from working with these wonderful people, and alongside that, what academic research says and what industry best practice tells us that we need to be mindful of when we're thinking about change that works. So at Kaleidoscope, we started off, interestingly, thinking about why change fails before we then started to think about why change works or how change works. And I'm not going to read through every single bullet point on this slide, but really just to draw your attention to, we know that change works in three large sections. The bit at the beginning, which we talk about as being unfreezing, but it's the planning, it's the recognition there is something that needs to change, and let's actually quite consciously, quite intentionally recognize that and make a decision to move into what is changing transition. It's the work that happens, the stuff that happens around changes. It could be changing a process, it could be changing a policy, it could be changing ways of working, it could be a massive big organizational restructure, reorganization. And then moving into what we talk about is refreezing, which is the adoption of change. And what we recognize when change doesn't work well, it's often because people rush through these processes too fast. They don't talk to people, they don't set a real clear direction and vision, and they're keen to get to the point of completion much sooner than actually the organisation or the team or the change embedding is actually ready to be there. And part of that is because change is so much more than about process or structures or systems. It's actually so often about people and mindsets and behaviors and relationships forming and forging, and that stuff takes time. So we moved from there to start thinking about why change works. We have highlighted 6 principles that we think that when you are planning and leading change need to be true for your change to stand a chance of success. And this is embedded in a range of different research pieces as well. So we know that we need to meet people where they're at. It needs to happen through real work. It needs to feel tangible and practical. It's deliberate and planned. It's curious and courageous and countable. It's not assuming the answers, but actually really genuinely leaning in. It prioritizes progress. And importantly, it's owned by those who do the work. We involve people who actually understand the nuts and the bolts of the work that is done. But the bit that my head is in at the minute is a little bit around, I work with a lot of teams across a lot of organisations, and we talk a lot about being a high-performing team. And one of the challenges I get back is there is so much change going on, we can't possibly think about being a high-performing team. And this slide's just move back one more, Shane, and I'll be just wrap up in 30 seconds. I really have grappled with this space between can you be a high performing team and do change that works well, and where I've come back down to is absolutely you can, because those principles around change that work, the only way to implement them and apply them is in the context of team. And if we're going to lead change well, we have to bring people on the journey and sometimes reset our expectations around what our clear shared purpose is as a team, be really honest about the skills and capabilities that we're going to need our team to bring to the fore in the middle of change, and also develop an inclusive development culture in which people can speak openly and honestly about the reality of the world in which they are working. That's just a little bit of thought, a little bit of provocation around how we think about change in the context of teams. But I really want to step to one side and hand over to Thea so that we can hear from her wealth of experience and research and understanding around how change really works. So Thea, over to you.
Thanks very much. For those who don't know me, I'm the Chief Executive of the Nuffield Health and Social Care think tank. I don't run the private hospitals and I don't run the gyms, just the Health and Social Care think tank. But before I did this, I did have a real job in the real world where I was the Chief Executive of a trust. If we can move on, please. So I'm going to talk a bit about the challenge of change. I'm not going to answer all the questions that were put on the slide earlier, but maybe give a bit of theory around some of it. If we can move on, please. Why should we talk about change? Obviously, to this audience, you all know all of this. It's never been more important to talk about change. We have a newish government, a 10-year plan, lots and lots of pressure, no more money, the Darzi report, and also worth noticing, public satisfaction has never been so low in the NHS as it is today. That's British Social Attitude Survey. Can we move on, please? Large-scale change is often hard, and it's really curious to look at why planned change fails so often and that good intentions aren't enough. And one of the things that I think is really interesting, and I'm imagining a lot of people who've chosen to be here are quite psychologically minded, but one of the things that's really interesting is that as a species, we're surprisingly resistant to not learning about things that mean that change fails, and it's often wholly predictable why that happens. Whereas a health service, I would say we're over obsessed with data and less obsessed with ethnography. What do I mean by that? We like numbers, and numbers are great. I love numbers as well, but we're less obsessed with getting off our bottoms and going and spending time with people, talking to people, being alongside people. And if we're really going to understand change, we have to use data in a very complex way. There's a phrase called thick data, which means that we use ethnography as well as numbers. And we need to think about change as being complex and not just being complicated. Very little explanation of what do I mean by that. If we were in a room together, what I'd say is if I was throwing a ball now, it would be a complicated process. Physics would tell you exactly what's likely to happen because of my size, where I'm, the size of the ball, what I'm doing. If I have a bird in my hand and I let it go, where it's going to fly and where it's going to land is complex. If we use the wrong processes in the way we think, we will end up with the wrong way of doing things. If we can move on, please. The problem is we all want change to be magic. We all want it to be quite simple and to work really quickly. And often it just doesn't work like that. Well, some people think if you just shout enough, it will happen. That doesn't work either. Let's move on. One of the wonderful things about the NHS is it's all about its people. And we often say the NHS is its people. However, the reason that the NHS is so hard to enact change in is because it's all about people. And I've listed some of the things here that are all true about all of us all the time. We all think we're unique and independent, and we're not. We like being parts of groups. We all think that we'll speak up. There's loads of research that shows that we often don't. We have bystander problems. We all are part of bubbles of thought and compliance, and we think we're not. We all often fear conflict, not rocking the boat. And we're all often finding it very difficult to speak up and challenge power and not to be part of club thinking. It's quite hard to be an outsider. The NHS is full of lots and lots of different clubs. You may be outside of all of these, but you'd be very unusual if you were. If we can move on, please. So, I think most responses to change are completely understandable, and why things work or why things fail are often understandable. But we often don't take enough time to understand it, and we often push against resistance rather than looking at it. Earlier on, both Shane and Katie have talked about the fact that we have to be with the people who do the work. And I go back to my emphasis on ethnography. We continue to do change processes with an imagination of what work is like rather than reality of work as done. And I couldn't really overemphasize how important I think that is in the work that anybody does. We can go on, please. So I think if we understood our own data, i.e. we understood our own psychology, we are our own people alongside our own facts and figures, I think we could really manage change a lot better. And I'm quoting Douglas Adams here. The answer to what it would be is really big. You just wouldn't believe how vastly, hugely, mind-bogglingly big it is. We can move on, please. So I want to talk about something that is often not talked about. When we talk about change and I talk about people and psychology, people will assume that I'm very, very fluffy and I want to hug a tree. So I like to start by talking about something like financial incentives and change, because it doesn't get more tough and more proper than financial incentives. And there's a wonderful piece of research by Marshall and Harrison about financial incentives in the NHS in particular. And I could talk about this area of work for hours, but I won't. But just take away, incentives do not produce rational or predictable behaviours. Marvellous, isn't it? And there is a significant relationship between the external incentives and your internal moral motivation. You can all think about that. Everybody on this call can think about that. We do things and we'll be incentivized and we will experience something and want to do it, but there's got to be that match. And if that's not there, actually, you can crowd out with the wrong incentive, you can crowd out intrinsic motivation. We actually don't really know how financial incentives interact with feelings of professionalism, whether that's a professional manager, whether that's a professional nurse, professional doctor. We don't know what it means and how incentives work with our feelings of control or identity, but we know it's really important. Can we move on, please? Another area I like to talk about is skill mix. Again, something I could talk about a lot. And it's one of the big, big changes that we have in the NHS. We have always had skill mix. We've always introduced new professions. We started doing that from 1948, it hasn't stopped. Some areas have become toxic and no go. But if we move on, let's talk about why we do it. Just move on to the next slide because I'm aware of the time. What we've done, and I think this is very interesting, some people on the call may come from a sociology background, and George Ritzer is a sociologist, and he talked about the McDonaldization of society. And we talk in the health service sometimes about taskification. And the emphasis on a McDonald's approach to your work is efficiency, predictability, and control. Sounds great. But what happens when you taskify work is it can lead to reduced autonomy and reduced job satisfaction. Breaking care into constituent points can be really, really useful. Really useful. I'm not saying anything about a particular role, but it can be challenging. It can offer little comfort. There is very little work that's been done on what we've done to the English NHS. We have more taskification and more skill mix, different professionals than any other part of Europe. That could be brilliant. I genuinely, you cannot find a research body that tells you what is going on. But what we do know, if we move on, that is if you introduce skill mix in a way that isn't thoughtful, that isn't understand people, it doesn't take care of what that means to your feelings of professionalism, to your feelings of self-worth and identity, you will get it wrong. And it will become a lightning rod for everybody else's concerns about everything else. So skill mix, workforce, financial systems, all of these things which are sort of not even thought of as part of change are thrown into the health service, but actually will come back to people and how people react. Thaler is one of the big writers on behavioural economics, won big prizes with others, writing about, well, I would say writing about psychology, but they call it behavioural economics. And he said, basically, in understanding the economic way in which change happens, people are human, look around. It's people who do the work, understand the work and change the work. And it can be complicated and it can be slow. one of the things I'm sometimes asked, and I would be asked when I was a chief exec and was running an organization, if you work in this way, how can you do that when time is of the essence and when so much is going on? And I'd reflect back to what Katie said about high performing teams. You don't have time not to do this. You don't have time not to think about the human factor, how people react, the complexity of change, the emotional part of change. You don't have time to ignore that data and to focus on something that is perceived as a hard fact. Because it ain't what you don't know that gets you into trouble. It's what you know for sure that just ain't so. And if I go to my final slide, please. Peter Hyman may be known to some of you and probably not to others because some of you will be a lot younger than me. But Peter Hyman was an advisor to the Blair government. And when he left, he went into teaching and education. And he said he recognised that lots and lots of what he said about change, lots of what he said about policy was wrong when he was there. And he said, I realise real delivery is about the grind and not just the ground. It's about the combination of often small things that build over time through individual relationships and genuine expertise and hard work. I think change programs are nearly always, as Shane said right at the beginning, not about your model, it's about your people. It's about your leadership. It's relational. It's not transactional. And it will be about a combination of small things that build over time and gives you a journey to where you need to be. And I'll stop there, Shane. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you so much, Katie. Thank you so much. Wow, I mean, there's a wealth of things that we could unpack there. I'm going to start, Thea, with a question for you. Bit of a sort of elephant in the room, or a moose head on the table, as our Swedish friends like to say. So, this is probably a self-selecting group. I think you and I talked about this, people who've come along here, and lots of people will be saying, my God, this is good. I know the stuff is true. I feel a bit better. I'm not missing something. And let's be honest, if we look at how some of the recent changes that have emanated from, let's just name it, Wellington House, largely run contrary to a significant amount of what we're saying here, and so much change that we experience runs contrary to what we're saying here. How do you hold on to your sort of sanity? How do you hold on to your integrity? How do you continue to make the case for evidence-based change when it can feel like everything we're seeing it runs to the contrary? So you personally and you professionally.
It's very hard, but obviously it interacts with where you find yourself in the system and the privilege that you have. I mean, I'm in an extraordinary privileged job currently where I have a responsibility to speak out, have responsibility. That's literally my job to provide evidence for better healthcare and to talk about it. But when you're the chief exec of an organization, you absolutely have the ability to continue to lead in a psychologically intelligent way. And you can do that. You can put an umbrella around your organization. You have to do what needs to be done to ensure that you are playing the game, you're part of the system. But you can do that. And if you are a leader within an organization, as long as the organization has given you enough tools, enough ability to lead well, you can, I think, lead in a psychologically complex and thoughtful way wherever you are. However, if the leadership of your organization is brutalizing and doesn't allow for it, you can't flourish. There's no point pretending you can't. You won't.
I'm really glad you're using the language, sort of that word brutalized. We hear a lot from amazing colleagues and clients we work with, this sort of language of sort of the feeling of violence, the feeling of sort of quite violent approaches to change, violent sort of language, violent sort of interventions. And of course, with that can come a whole load of emotions around shame, around sort of paralysis. To say, Katie, I'm just really interested in you, because often we'll meet teams or colleagues who come to us because they're feeling exactly that, and they feel stuck, and they're having problems pushing through change fatigue. They're having problems making the case for one more change, perhaps have got caught in a cycle of violence between themselves about what good change is. How do you meet people where they're at, and strike a balance between the art and the science of one more time, but only with evidence?
Mm. Um, I think first of all, with a whole stack of compassion, and actually the emotions that people show up with are very valid emotions. People work in really high pressure roles. A lot of people that we work with are holding such significant levels of accountability that they feel the weight of that on their shoulders, as well as the responsibility to lead their teams and their organizations well, and at the same time experiencing sometimes systems and or organizations that feel quite volatile and feel quite difficult to get their arms around. So what I would tend to do first of all is listen, and very much draw on creating coaching spaces for people to make sense of it for themselves. Um, the second thing is I do like to use models and theories and frameworks, but quite lightly. So it can sometimes be a really helpful way of helping people make sense of. So we'll often use models like Marshall Ganz's public narrative theory, and get people to think about their stories of me, stories of we, stories of now. I often try and help people step back and think about what is an us story and what is a them story, and kind of really help people start to recognize that some of the narrative that they're forming and the stories that they are telling are us and them narratives, and kind of examine for themselves how useful and helpful that is. But I think before we even start stepping into a space of let's do the change, we've got to let people acknowledge the emotion that they're feeling, because if you come in with a false positivity and pretend that it's not there, that can actually be really damaging and really unhelpful. So I think you've got to create spaces for people to recognize that, and then you can start moving into the action. The second thing I would add in is around mental models, and recognizing that when you're leading change, it's incredibly important to ask people to make sure that when they're talking about apples, they're all talking about the same apples, so that actually you remove a level of conflict and a level of challenge by just helping people recognize that we see the world from different perspectives and different spaces, and then it opens up a little bit more of a honest conversation. But I think I agree with Thea in terms of you've got to also be honest around like what is the art of the possible in the context that you find yourself in, and with the ask that you are being made as well.
Thank you, Katie. Thea, there's been a question in the chat, which I've just asked Geeta. I think you posted about asking Thea to just respond to something. If you could just, Geeta, pop in chat what it is specifically you'd like Thea to revisit, we can absolutely pick that up. While we're doing that, Thea, I'm really interested in something you talked about earlier about turning up with integrity, owning your own response to change, and the reality of finding yourself in sometimes circumstances that don't lend themselves to that. In terms of this sort of approach of both a relational approach to mobilizing change as well as a rational approach, you work for a think tank. You start with evidence. What practices have worked for you or have worked on you in terms of moving forward with change? How do you get the balance between a heart and head, if you like?
I was thinking about where changes work with me is where I feel listened to. I feel part of a process. I I don't have to feel that I've won, but I appreciate that there are some people who are in change processes who absolutely feel they have to win. And those will be people sometimes who don't go forward through a change process. They're not changing, they're stuck. But for me, running big changes, little changes, merging teams, new models of care, it's always using the data and listening to people. There is this anthropological term called thick data. And that is a term that means that you use all the information you've got. And I do feel that in the health service, we are. So, I mean, we could have had a meeting on productivity. Such an interesting conversation we could have had about productivity and driving productivity. And we often look at a very tiny subset of the information available to us about a team's productivity, which will be the number of people they're seeing in a clinic, and maybe the referrals on, and maybe the people who come back. But that's only one bit of data. There is a data which is, have we spoken to all those people in the team? Do we know what's really going on? Have we asked them? Have we spoken to them? And it is, for people business, we are remarkably unpeople focused. You compare us to somewhere like Google, which is not a people business. It is an absolutely for-profit, making a lot of money business. They do a lot more people business than we do. I mean, the Aristotle Project is one that I often talk about. But so change works because you take change seriously and you use the evidence about it, which is that it's about a range of relational and transactional factors that need to be brought together.
Yes, I mean, super interesting about this relational bit. So I was revisiting recently. So just for those who listen, Project Aristotle is one of the world's biggest studies of teams, which Google ran, identified 5 key characteristics of high-performing teams. Really recommend you look it up. It's really interesting. I was revisiting Elizabeth Menzies-Leith work in the late 50s at, I think it was then Royal Middlesex, now the Royal Free, about why she was brought in to help unlock some issues with maternity. And basically what she said, and this is 70 years ago, was that the presenting problems get a rational response, but actually underneath it, the issues that were really blocking change were issues of dehumanization. That's the right thing. So what you're talking about is a 70-year phenomenon. How do we sort of break that through? And Katie, one of the things I'm interested in, and we see this a lot, is our current ways of working are much more remote and hybrid. And so it's really interesting as we hear more and more about we've lost trust, we don't have time together, we know that better things happen and possibilities emerge when we're together. How big a problem is this distancing, physical distancing that we're seeing as a phenomenon, or is it just, I mean, is it just you know, a sort of a rounding error in a bigger challenge?
That's a huge question, Shane. How big a problem? I think, like any problem, if you don't pay attention to it, it grows, right? If I go out for a run and I have a niggle in my knee and I don't pay attention to it, and I go for another run, that niggle's going to get worse and it's going to get bigger. So I don't know that it is simple enough to say the problem is that we are remote working, but are we paying enough attention to the hygiene factors that we need in place to be able to remote work effectively and well, and how are we creating those connection points? I think it's difficult to quantify how big a problem it is and how big a challenge it is, but we do know that where there is not human connection, everything that we do starts to suffer. And so I wouldn't want to sit here and say the answer is that we have to be in person and in person all of the time, but I absolutely do recognize that if we don't pay attention to some of it's this thing, right, where you take an action and it's that system thinking about our teams and our organizations and our own lives, and actually recognizing that one action that we take because it solves one problem will have a knock-on impact somewhere else. So remote working solves a whole set of really great challenges that we need to overcome, but we've got to be honest with ourselves around the challenges that might throw up in other places. And one of the very real challenges is the relationships that we hold and the level of effective trust, not just cognitive trust, but the effective trust that we need to be able to be effective in our teams. That when we talk about high performing teams at Kaleidoscope, those last three characteristics are all around the relational dynamic. Like how do you make sure that you're continuing to build trust and psychological safety within your team? I think that is a challenge that is as current if you're in person as it is remote. It needs continuous attention.
Lovely. Thank you so much, Katie. I mean, sort of interested in Thea, a little bit more from you. You like us had a role in the shaping the 10-year plan, and I know one of the many amazing things that you've done recently is, play a significant role in one of the sort of working groups that's at that around the 10-year plan, around the how and the sort of the change. And one of the criticisms we hear a lot about these programs is that the changes proposed don't consider their own execution. It's a whole lot of what we're going to do. There's maybe a bit less about why, and there's usually virtually nothing about how. So what's your sort of, how optimistic are you feeling, or what sort of advice had you the opportunity to offer to the department about the how of implementing the 10-year plan?
Well, I was part of a group that discussed the importance of the how, and how from everything from what we know about the implementation of change in teams, from the implementation of large-scale change. And there was a group of people who offered that wisdom into the process, collective wisdom. I'm not saying it's my wisdom, but I have no idea whether it will be used or not. So, as simple as that. You can be part of a group that has a conversation. I cannot tell you whether or not it will be utilized to inform the 10-year plan or not. Don't know. We'll see.
That's a very diplomatic answer, and it reminds me why you're in such an esteemed position. I guess this is the thing, isn't it? You can only turn up with integrity. You can only continue to do and advise and work in a way that you feel is right. I'm just going to stay with Thea.
To a working group to large national level and believes that there will be a direct line of sight to what's said to what is produced, which is a highly political and highly complex process, you would be not understanding really how complicated it is. So yeah, we asked, we responded.
Tough-minded optimism, I think, is the term. I've got an interesting question, Katie. I'm just going to give this one to Thea, if that's all right. Andrew has asked a question about being in brutalized environments, and change can be difficult, and the importance of sort of self-care and alliance building to sort of survive without sort of being sucked into that. Anything you've seen work well, either in your current role or as a chief exec in a large community provider who underwent a lot of change? How do we look after ourselves and each other?
I think you have to be honest about it. One of the things that I saw then and I see now is less of you can't start looking after people or looking after yourself unless you've accepted this is where you are. This is a brutalizing environment and it's tough. But I do think you need to go back to your values. If as an organization you've got values and behaviors you hold strong to, I think you keep talking about them, but you talk about it honestly. I find it very difficult when There's conversations where a clinical team maybe will say, we feel really distressed because we want to provide, and we know we should provide 10 sessions for every patient, but we can only provide 3, and because of the waiting list and because of the pressure. I think as a leader, whether you're the chief exec, the chair, the operational leader of that team, it's sitting there with people and going, but this is where we are. Is it safe enough? What can we do? How do we manage this, knowing this is our offer to the public? This is what our value is. This is why we turned up. This is why we want to be part of public service. I think there's something very powerful in honesty and reflection. I have a personal dislike of resilience training, but that's another workshop or another session. I think there is something very important about understanding yourself, understanding your strength, understanding how you are going to, with others, go through this difficult time. Resilience training sometimes comes from a place of suggesting an individualistic response is needed to what is actually a structural failing. And that's some of my concern about it.
Lovely. I posted in chat just a response to the recommendation around Michael West's compassionate leadership piece, a really thoughtful and quite provocative piece by Professor Keith Grint, who used to be at Warwick University, saying that compassionate leadership is necessary, but it's not enough, and it's potentially distracting us from the real question, which is, why are we throwing the responsibilities for compassionate leadership onto compassionate leaders in a system that is fundamentally not set up to facilitate the kind of change that we need? And so it's almost like a sort of a anti-resilience 2.0. I think it's really, 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 really interesting. Now, I am devastated and shocked to know that it is 4 minutes until we close. So I'm personally gutted about that, and I'm sorry for you all, because I'm sure we could be here for a very, very long time. What I'm going to do is just give you a little chance to share what you're taking away. So Pete, if you could please toggle us to the question in Menti, which is right at the very end. What's the one thing that sort of provoked you, or that you're taking away to think about or will be passing on to colleagues? Katie, what are you taking away? And then Thea, I'll give you the last word about what you're taking away, or if you had one thing you would invite colleagues to take away, what might that be? Katie, and Thea.
I think there is something for me that is around honesty in change, and honesty with self, honesty with the people that we are working with, and with the system that are asking us to change. It feels there's something very important for me about authenticity in change, and recognizing that, you know, it's complicated, it's difficult at times, and if we really want to bring people with us, we've got to be able to have the transparent, honest conversations with those around us.
Lovely. Thea, what were you taking away, or what you would invite, if there was one nugget you would invite people to take away?
Oh, I think, you know, looking at some of the questions, people have, you know, huge experience that they're taking away with them and are we using already. I think it's how hard this work is, how hard it is, despite the mountains of evidence, the decades of work, the international comparator data, how remarkably hard it continues to take this approach to change and put it at the heart of your leadership. And but it continues to be the work that's really important. Brilliant.
Okay. Thank you for bringing those in. We'll play all that back. Pete, I wonder if we could please pop back to the slides. And just nudge that. I'll nudge those along. Sorry, now I've got control back. Again, Pete, thank you so much for all your help behind the scenes. I would ask you all to take this picture away and have a think about what it tells us about what we've talked about today. I will give you only one clue. The gentleman on the right who stepped out of a room suggesting change is linear is called Semmelweis. And and he died in a sanatorium at the age of 40, having some years before discovered, long before anyone else, that hand washing was a direct causation in premature deaths of women in childbirth. And he died in a sanatorium because he was driven mad by the system's unwillingness to respond to his very thick data. So something for us all to think about. Be more Semmelweis, be less Semmelweis, I think might be the motto. Beware of glass boxes, be honest about squiggly lines. Okay, thank you so much. Thank you very, very much to Katie. Thank you very much to you, Thea, in particular. It's been a real privilege having you and listening to you. And I think, can we tell everybody to look out for something that's coming up in a publication that you've written a piece that might be coming up soon on Change?
I think there will be something at some point, I'm not sure when, in the Journal of Hospital Management, and there's various of my ramblings on our website.
So to use Thea's technical term, Marion, I would invite you all to get off your bottom and rush towards the Nuffield's website, rush thereafter to ours, and keep an eye out for a Journal of Hospital Management in bookstores near you. I think the task of always learning and always remaining curious, I think, is a great place for us all to start. If you're interested in finding more about us, various ways to do that. We're a lovely, friendly bunch. Please come and say hello. And just finish on the music theme, a reminder that you do rock. The record or any of you is not broken. We all have agency. It can feel incredibly difficult at times, but we just need to do what we know to be true, do it to the very best of our ability, encourage others around us to do the same. That's all any of us can ask of ourselves and each other. So you rock, keep on rocking, and we will send everything that is generated today to you over the next week. Thea, thank you so much again. Katie, thanks to you. Thanks for everybody who's joined. Pete, thank you again for your masterful tech support in the back. Also to you, Henry, and Ariadne for your help in making today possible. Wish you all a fantastic afternoon and a great week.